Hi Alexander, I have your hand up in front of me, so I'm just going to give this a quick review and see how you did. Overall, it looks great. I think you did really well with the assignment, but I'll just go and do a few things that I've seen as I've looked around this. And again, like I've said in some of the other lecture reviews or some of the other assignment reviews, all of this that I'm speaking about is just general construction stuff. Your hand may actually be doing strange things. In which case ignore what I'm saying, but I'll just speak quite generally because I don't have your hands in front of me. Okay, so the first thing is I'm feeling like the head of the radius in here is going a little bit too round and bulbous, right? In general, and again, I speak kind of generally, all this is quite a square mass, right? So it's gone quite round. Of course, be very careful about where your radius ends and where your carpals begin, because that's kind of a transition between the flat block and what ends up being a crested arc, kind of a transitional plane to the metacarpals, right? And so this kind of, like you've done, rounds out almost in two steps, and then we get to the metacarpals. Your hand looks a little bit bowed in the middle, meaning that it really kind of rolls off possibly a bit too far out here at the start of the kind of the pinky side. Certainly we can articulate the metacarpals of the fourth and fifth digits, but there's still a little bit of solidity down here from the carpals in that area. Okay. Also, kind of look just at the end of the head of the ulna, right? So head of the ulna is going to be sitting in here. And there's a nice transitional step between that and the start of kind of what ends up being the fifth metacarpal, right? And through here we have kind of the extensor carpi ulnaris tendon passing down to the metacarpal. Not always visible, but you should see a little bit of this, this head sticking out. And then a good step between this and the start of the metacarpals out here. Okay. From here, let's just have a look up at the top. Again, I'm just going to smooth this out. I'm going to try to unify some of this stuff in here, right? Because we're talking about, as we're in kind of this area, we're talking about heads of the kind of the metacarpal and the heads of the metacarpals and the carpals in here. So things are fairly consistent, and there's no deep depressions. It's only as you start to get out into this area between the first and second metacarpal that we can get a little depression. I'm just going to slot your first dorsal interosseous in a little bit more and just smooth this out. Moving out from here, the thing that I noticed kind of going around the front is your thumb looks a little kind of shovel-shaped, and maybe it is. I think either it needs to be a little bit thinner in here or maybe a little bit thicker at the outside, or maybe it's just like that. It's quite flat as well. But again, maybe you have a flat thumb. It's not for me to say, but just something to double check. And now let's just look at the proportions of the fingers. In general, I think most of them are pretty good. I think that maybe this kind of middle phalanx of the pinky finger got a little bit wide, and it got a little bit of an arc to it between the knuckle. So knuckles here and here, we kind of get a big kind of concavity. And also here we get a deep concavity. And in general, kind of the back upward facing surfaces of the knuckle don't have deep concavities, right? It's a fairly consistent plane. It looks like there's a little bit of concavity when you get to the skin masses sitting on either side, but in general, the dorsal surface is pretty planar. All right, so I just be careful about that. These little bumps on either side. And then look at this segment, this kind of palmar fat pad. I don't think it's distributed quite properly. I think it would be more the division would be more like this, right? And then this would come down, and this would end up bulging out like this, and this little segment would go back in further. That would just kind of redistribute some of the mass. Beyond that, I think things are pretty good. Let's see. What else do I see? This kind of comes back to the same thing I was talking about with concavities in the knuckle. Be careful of broad convexities as well, right? The power of a well-constructed finger ends up being in the very, very readable flat planes on the back of each phalanx, right? And yours kind of do a broad, at least in this particular finger, just kind of a broad transition, right? So you might just be a little better off to just sharpen up some of the just the individual segments. Then you can see that it's a little bit more distinct transitions. You'll say, but Scott, there's a little bit of a concavity here. This little concavity that I left in is more or less what you would expect from the fat pads or the skin folds on the top of the knuckle, right? So that's what will break up the lines more than anything. But certainly there's a little bulge, but not as much as you had on the last finger that we were looking at. Okay, I think that's about it. Overall, very nice work. Oh, sorry, one more thing that I did notice. Look at the base of your wrist, right? It's kind of tapering from wide on the top to narrow at the bottom. I would expect, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is going to flare out a little bit and at least be constant width as opposed to tapering in. Maybe it's to do with this flexor tendon. And actually, I think if I was just going to be doing this for artistic effect, I'd probably do this taper in the block of the radius a little bit. See where that gets to. Again, kind of gives the same thing we're talking about with the knuckles, a very strong transition up here. It's a little push. Again, may not be your individual characteristics, so I might have just made this more generic, but just some things to think about. Okay, overall, very nice work. Pretty happy with the results, so well done. I will see you in week 5.